You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. With the escalation of the U.S.-initiated trade dispute, many industries have been affected. China's retaliatory tariff on imported vehicles is also a threat to American auto industry. Tesla, the U.S. electric vehicle manufacturer, has taken the lead in raising prices in the Chinese market due to higher duties. Last month, Tesla decided to build a $2 billion factory in Shanghai. The largest U.S. automaker, General Motors, and German brand BMW expressed support for easing trade frictions. Since the supply chain has been affected, automakers have lowered their full-year profit forecast. For more on the U.S.-China trade war and its impact on the car industry, we have in our Beijing studio Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome, sir. Welcome back. And also joining us, Mr. Gao Zhikai, who is a commentator for current affairs. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Meanwhile, we have in Washington, D.C., Mark Bush, professor from the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Also joining us in Washington, Steve Puigt, managing partner at Wetz Partners. It's good to see you once again, Mr. Puigt. I want to begin with you. Car industry, is it going to be the biggest victim of this U.S.-China trade war? Your assessment, very briefly.
Short answer is no. I think our agricultural sector is certainly going to take the hardest hit at this point because it will be much more long-lasting. I think the auto sector can recover once all of these negotiations and back and forth end a lot faster than ag.
All right. Professor Bush, what about your assessment? Obviously, for now, it is a place of crossfire.
The markets didn't seem terribly concerned about the first round of tariff escalation. The real question going forward is how do we see escalation go from here, and especially in light of China's threat to use non-tariffs, which in all honesty matter a lot more for the auto industry than the tariffs.
Professor Liu, this time China has already put out its list of the tariffs that is going to put on much further than it used to be. It's about $16 billion U.S. Almost 1/3 on this list are some kinds of vehicles, different kinds of vehicles, and different parts, engines of vehicles. Obviously, this is going to be the most hit area so far.
That's right. So right now, actually, I came from a number of dialogues from the United States for the last 2 weeks, and there has been quite a anxiety actually among all business circles, including the automakers, because they cannot just make a decision. They do not know how deep this war is going to be, and how the budget can be made, and how the market segments can be rearranged or restructured. So this is something very worrisome.
Here's the thing. We've been talking about this trade war, but the effect of the trade war is only seen right now. If you think about if the trade war continues between China and the United States, a few months from now, that's when the time when people will really realize what does it all mean, these numbers. Mr. Gao.
Well, China does not want to have a trade war with the United States. This trade war was initiated by the United States and imposed on China, and China has no other option but to retaliate. For your question on the impact on the auto industry, definitely there will be a major impact on the auto industry. The General Motors and Ford Motors, for example, their operations in mainland China are highly profitable, but most of these vehicles sold in China actually import engines or other major spare parts.
That's right.
So once you have tariffs imposed on the imports of these spare parts or the engines, definitely it will make their retail price in China much higher, and the General Motors cars and Ford Motor cars in China market will become less attractive.
So, Mr. Puigt, there seems to be no win-win game in a way for those car manufacturers, whether they are American, European, Japanese, or South Korean. I mean, in a way, they all have to use parts coming from different parts of the world, and some of them are actually coming from the United States. Therefore, the car prices retail likely to go up, and the consumers is likely to show their attitudes as a result of that. Mr. Pruitt.
Well, I think you're absolutely right in that assumption. I think what we're seeing already in the U.S. is some indications that they're actually retroactively raising prices on some of the 2018 models, and I know I've been trying to find some information about pricing for 2019 models that are already in production as well. But I suspect that, again, the pricing will go up across the board, not only here in the U.S., but also throughout the world.
Yeah. Having said that, though, Professor Bush, I mean, car industry sounds like just one industry, but actually the car industry is having its reaches to different parts of the economy. You name it. That's why it is becoming such a pillar of many industries, many economies around the world. So, Professor Bush, from there, where are we going?
Well, you're absolutely right that the auto industry represents so much that we associate with mature manufacturing. It is one of those industries that stands out as an icon for precisely that reason. But the broader fabric here is U.S.-China trade relations, and this is somewhat of a distracting issue at the moment, these retaliatory tariffs, with all the focus being on cars. We should be getting on to the business at hand, which is to improve relations and to deal with some of the themes that have been raised in the U.S. Section 301 case, and for that matter, China's litigation against Section 301 at the World Trade Organization. At some point, we have to negotiate this to make it all go away, and the sooner we get onto that, the better.
What is the point, do you think? When is the point, Professor Bush? May I invite your wisdom?
Well, we're going to have to wait a little bit until after the midterms, unless the Trump administration can offer some kind of win going into the midterms that looks like a concession. I'd like to see the focus shift more to the intellectual property and to investor rights. And the most concrete thing that we could be doing at the moment is revisiting the prospects for a U.S.-China bilateral investment treaty. So much of what is being asked for of China by the United States would be nicely dealt with in the context of a bilateral investment treaty.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Dr. Gao, you want to respond to our American colleague?
No, I think President Bush and his administration need to wake up to the hard lesson that trade war is not easy to win, and trade war is mutually destructive.
What if they don't wake up? What can you do?
Then the United States will be undermined by itself, mainly because it's not only losing its esteem in the world, people will give less and less respect to the United States, and the credibility of the United States will be eroded or destroyed, and then the United States economy will suffer because of the retaliation, not only just by China, but by India, by many European countries, by Japan, by South Korea, you name it.
But
trade war is not going to win.
Things are much more complicated than the United States versus the rest of the world. You see the negotiation going on between the United States and European countries, even though some of them are not necessarily successful. You also see Japan and the United States likely to go into further negotiation. We do not know the results of that. And you see attitudes coming from China and Russia, but a lot of things are very mixed picture. So Professor Liu, this is a time of confusion, but also a time of affirming our stance, which is what kind of world, what kind of trade internationally we want. Professor Liu, your thought about this confusion in a way, this specific state of time?
Well, people see that we are really seeing a sea wave of changes today because the isolation and retreat from the multilateral trading platform. But I do agree with you that the nature of trade disputes between United States versus EU or even versus Japan is very different to that really between the United States and China.
Yeah.
Because the it is not only a trade issue, it becomes a political issue, and it also becomes a
geopolitical issue. Yes, indeed.
And also institutional.
But you know, since our focus is more about the auto industry, let's focus even more on some specific examples. we talk about the industry as a whole, but actually every example in the industry is important. Tesla, for example, its revenues in China doubled last year to more than $2 billion. This accounted for 20% of the company's total. Tesla CEO Elon Musk also visited Shanghai last month to open a $2 billion factory. Of course, he did it very low profile, given the political atmosphere in Washington and in the rest of the world's capitals. Therefore, Mr. Pruitt, the question is beyond even the trade war. What would this round of so-called trade war and even leading to geopolitics change mean for auto industry, for their future? Is there going to be a huge migration of automakers in different parts of the world? Is the structure of auto industry likely to be very different at the end of the day after this trade war? What about the employment opportunities? What about the pillar role it used to have in the economy? Will they still be the same? Mr. Pruitt.
Well, we've already seen several and heard several announcements from companies that have indicated they were going to build facilities abroad in China and elsewhere to manufacture their vehicles to get around this tariff fight. I would note, just in response to your previous question, that we're hearing at least some noise about some back-channel negotiations that are going on between the U.S. and the Chinese. And I think it's important to put that in context as we relate to the political situation here in America and the fact that we do have now in about 90 days our mid-term elections coming up. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on the Trump administration, quite frankly, to give on a number of issues as we move forward. Whether they do or not will, quite frankly, affect a number of congressional elections and will, I think, ultimately, long-term, have an impact on the way the U.S. then proceeds in these trade deals. So Congress has been flexing their muscles a little bit around some legislative initiatives that would, if not restrain, certainly restrict what the president can do on his own. And I think all of that is going to play very aggressively in the next 30 days as we see Congress come back from their summer recess.
Yeah, we are looking forward to that. What's going to happen, all the dramas then. Professor Liu, what about my question, though, that will the auto industry, as a result of this round of quote-unquote trade war, be different from what it used to be? Where it is located, the focus of this industry, and the potential of this industry?
I think there's going to be a fragmentation of the auto manufacturing industry, and
why would you say that?
That's because each of the big markets are really setting up great walls. So therefore, they have to put different operations within different walls. So that's very naturally. And also the driver for this fragmentation would be, number one, is really the buying power, the market size.
That's right.
And also the manufacturer cost, including materials and labor cost.
Professor Bush, what about your thoughts on the industry itself, its potential as a result of this?
I think two other factors are much more likely to shape the fragmentation of the U.S. auto industry. One will be the negotiations under NAFTA concerning rules of origin, and the other will be whether the United States signs a free trade deal with the European Union to match the free trade deal signed between Canada and the European Union. Those two factors will certainly lead a lot of U.S. auto vendors to entertain the prospect of moving to Canada, which is, in my view, a much greater issue at the moment than the tariffs that China has imposed in retaliation for the 301.
I see. Professor Bush, as someone who's been studying the industry, would you like to put a timeline about how much time do you think the auto industry would be calm and look around and try to figure out before they move to the next stage, which is to change the structure of the industry, as you mentioned earlier? Professor.
These investments are really lumpy, and I would imagine that until there's a better sense for clarity as to what's going to happen under NAFTA, whether the EU is going to negotiate with the U.S., or for that matter, the U.K. with the U.S., and then the question being, how does the world look in terms of the availability of things such as subsidies? And in that regard, I'm very interested in the future of China 2025 as a potential draw for U.S. interest in producing, and for that matter, designing autos in the future.
I see. Dr. Gao, your thought about that?
Well, you talked about the impact on the automobile industry. I think if we remove all the other factors, including reducing tariffs to zero, then the U.S. auto industry is in no competitiveness compared with the German and the Japanese car industry. So the American industry in the automobile sector probably will be crushed if you take out all these other factors. However, I would say the automobile industry itself is under tremendous amount of change. The new types of vehicles,
yes,
the new energy vehicles, including electric cars and the hydrogen car, for example, are coming along. And therefore, if I advise President Donald Trump, he needs to wake up to this megatrend. He needs to really pool all the resources in the United States to capture the high ground in the new type of automobiles, rather than imposing tariffs and fighting a trade war on the traditional car industry.
As you may know, Dr. Gao, structural reform is very different and difficult for a politician than just putting on a tariffs on the goods coming from the other countries. That's just the easy cut over there. I'm sure you understand that perfectly well over the past few weeks. Mr. Pruitt, though, you know, there are Washington apparatus looking at innovation, looking at the industry's future, looking at geopolitically what is best for the United States with America first, fairly, some say. What do you say, how the policies is likely to influence eventually the growth of the auto industry in the U.S.?
Well, I would make 2 points. The first, that the automotive industry as a collective is very effective and is ramping up their lobbying and advocacy efforts across the board. And again, I think given the fact that we expect to see some shifts in the political balance here in America this fall, I think they're well positioned to impact that discussion. The second point, though, is I think given the nature of the automotive industry, I'm not one who suggests that they're going to wait for all these things to settle down. I think they're already sitting around tables, game playing some of these scenarios out to try and position themselves, because it takes a while to direct their resources where they want them to be.
I see. Thank you so much for the four of you for being with us. Steve Pruitt, Gao Zhikai, Liu Baocheng, last but not least, Mark Bush. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us, coming from your own perspectives. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From Tian Wei and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.